Did you know that there was a golden age of piracy? The term was first coined by English journalist George Powell in 1894, and those dates seem to correspond directly with slave routes. Pirates ruled the high seas for less than 100 years. The golden age was considered from 1650 to about 1720.
Follow the show on social media to keep up with what's going on and to see pics that go along with each episode. Search for Lore of the South on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
Welcome back to Lore of the South with me and Kelly Cruz. How the heck are y'all doing? We almost managed 2 in a row. But producer Mike and I, we took a quick trip up to Raleigh, and that kind of threw a wrench in my podcasting stuff. I did another one where I started writing an episode, and then I was like, no thank you, I've changed my mind. So that's what you're going to hear today, was what I finally decided on after our little getaway to Raleigh. We saw friends there. My husband got to visit like a childhood friend he hasn't seen, my gosh, probably nearly 10 years. I know it was at least pre-pandemic, and that was 4 years ago, so tack on a few extra to it. So that was awesome. It was a great trip. We're looking forward to going back again. Really want to go visit Winston-Salem area and do some of the tours and stuff there. Looks incredibly intact from what I've looked up online. We did do a ghost tour in the old Raleigh downtown area. Not really too much to report back about it. Producer Mike and I will definitely be talking about it in the after show. If you're interested in our gossip, then you should check out Patreon. $3 a month, cheaper than gas station coffee, y'all. Let's see, anything else? No, I don't think so. So let's go ahead and dig up some history-making news. This one comes from CNN and was reported by Ashley Strickland. Matching dino tracks were discovered an ocean apart. The matching tracks are thought to have belonged to sauropods. Okay, y'all think like Littlefoot, Land Before Time. Those were sauropods. The big dinosaurs that blew snot rockets on Lexi in Jurassic Park. Those are sauropods. And I may not be saying it right, but I think I heard it that way once. So that's how I say it. The fossilized footprints are found along the Cameroon coast of Africa and along the coastline of Brazil. The two countries on 2 separate continents, separated by 3,700 miles of Atlantic Ocean, have a set of matching prints. That's just so wild to me how things like that can exist for millions of years. It's wild. This pathway shows that it was a migration route for the dinosaurs. They were traveling along this route well before the continental split occurred. The 2 continents we have today of South America and Africa first began their breakup about 140 million years ago. That's how we have the matching dino tracks separated by thousands of miles. Y'all, when I get asked the question, why are people from the U.S. the way we are? Some of us are loud, most of us are outspoken, and we don't like to get in line unless it's for a new iPhone. And a lot of places, they find it offensive or annoying, whatever. But this is what I say to them when I get these kinds of comments about, or generalization of Americans. This is my response to that. The Europeans that immigrated here were all younger sons, rebels, outlaws, and religious fanatics. And we cannot forget to mention the forced immigration and slave trade that moved millions to North America. You stir that all together and this is what you get. A bunch of stubborn independents that all want to be heard. When the colonies get rowdy, the government get the hoses out. I guess another way to put it was we're a country full of people whose ancestors were bullied, expelled, or stolen from their homelands. It might give us a little bit of a chip on our shoulders. So, whatever we are here in the U.S. today, it was created by people who immigrated here. So, y'all remember that, because we're y'all. Y'all are us. So, it's all humankind. Anyway, thank y'all for coming to my TED Talk. And if anybody know who the heck Ted is, y'all let me know. This kind of like talk about Americans and our rebellious ways and our outspokenness, that's what kind of led me to the idea of doing a summer wrap-up for us. And what is more summery than pirates? We're going to say goodbye to the summer with episode 85, A Southern Pirate. So we're going to concentrate on Anne Bonny in this episode. She was something else. She, Jack Rackham, and Mary Read were legendary in the Caribbean. And they struck fear into the hearts of anyone traveling in their territory. Most of the knowledge comes from a novel by Captain Charles Johnson. And that title was, y'all know I love me an old book title, because you don't even need to read the book. You can just read the titles. A general history of the robberies and murders of the most notorious pirates. And it was from 1724. It's speculated that Captain Charles was the pen name for Daniel Defoe. He authored such titles as Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders. And y'all know, with all of these sorts of histories, they've been told and retold so many times that the legends, they just become intertwined. Where Anne is probably as much legend as she is fact at this point. But we're going to go with it because it's fun and it's entertaining, and Anne was wild as heck. Anne's beginnings are a mixture of the captain's work and census records that were kept in the British colonies. Anne was born sometime in 1698 near Cork, Ireland. It's speculated that her father was a married attorney and that her mother had been his housekeeper. The story goes that William Cormac had married into a wealthy family, but his mother-in-law controlled the purse strings. As long as her daughter was happy, mommy-in-law was happy. And she was happy to supply an allowance. Well, William's wife becomes ill, and she returns to her mother's home for care. And while she's away, William hires Mary to keep house, while his wife recovers. One thing leads to another, and Mary finds herself pregnant. The wife returns home and is instantly suspicious. She even concocts a plan to frame Mary to have her arrested. She plants a trio of silver spoons in Mary's room, and then hosts a planned discovery, and has Mary's cell tossed, so to speak. And sure enough, the spoons were found and Mary was jailed. But once Mary's pregnancy was discovered, it said that William's wife felt a twinge of empathy and she dropped the charges. Another telling says that she didn't drop the charges until Mary gave birth in prison, and that what engaged her sympathy, and she dropped the false charges against Mary. So after this, the couple separates, but Cormac's wife continued to help support him. But word had gotten out about the lawyer's infidelities, and his reputation was more than a bit tarnished. William, he had even brought Anne into his single man's household and began to bring her up as a boy. He had hoped disguising his daughter as a son would throw his wife off of his scent so that she would continue to supply him with an income, especially since his business is failing. Cormac had hoped to train Anne up as a clerk, but as things tend to happen, the truth came out, and that young lad working in William's firm was not a lad at all, and it was known that this was Anne, his child, his illegitimate child with his housekeeper. And with that bit of info, William was cut off. Seeing little hope of restoring his name and business in his home country, he set sail for the colonies with Mary and Anne in tow. They settled in Charlestown, Charleston to me and you, sometime in the early 1700s. There, Charles Cormac tried to continue his practice as a lawyer, but found that there was more money to be made in the merchant trade, especially in the New World.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Tiny Expeditions, a podcast about genetics, DNA, and inheritance from the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology.
In each episode, we explore the exciting world of genetic research. We talk with some of the world's leading scientists about what's happening in the lab.
We also spend time talking with those who are using this information in everyday life.
We cover topics like DNA and forensics,
Saving the world's peanut supply with DNA,
preparing for future pandemics,
the promise and limitations of home DNA tests,
what happens when you put plants in space,
and how biotechnology can help us feed and fuel the world.
So join us on this journey into tiny science with the Tiny Expeditions podcast.
The happy family scenario didn't play out for long, though. Anne's mother, Mary, died during a typhoid epidemic. Anne was only 13. And with her, let's say, non-traditional upbringing, she was off to a rocky start. Let's go over some of this non-traditional stuff that 13-year-old Anne has already been through. She was born in a prison. Her father dressed her up as a boy and pretended she was the son of a friend of his. She was frequently separated from her mother and was pretty much raised in shame until they came to America, or the United States. And she wasn't about anything traditional. She had been brought up non-traditional. She was going to maintain that role. And around 18, her father tried to force an engagement on her to another local businessman there in Charlestown. But Anne, nope, she eloped. She ran away with John Bonney, a sailor, who sometimes took to piracy, and they settled in the Bahamas. It was a real pirate haven at the time. And Anne loved the life. It was constant adventure, free love and booze. Then, to save his own neck, her husband John Bonney turned informer to the governor of New Providence. It's here that it's thought that Anne would meet her next love, Calico Jack Rackham. John caught a rumor going around that his Anne had been seen about town with Calico Jack, who had come into port for a pardon. John Bonney wasn't too keen on his wife and the pirate, so he took Anne before Governor Rogers, who then ordered her whipped. Rackham tried to step in to save Anne from the ordeal by offering John a divorce by purchase, which meant that basically Calico Jack would pay for him to divorce his wife, and he would take Anne off of his hands. John declined this offer of divorce by purchase, and Anne and Jack fled, and Jack lost his pardon. But for Anne, the party was just starting. In August of 1720, Anne was assisting and even leading crews of men to overtake and capture vessels. She went about the ship dressed as a woman, but when it came to attack, she'd be rigged out in her pirate gear. It was during this time that Rackham and Anne took on board a crew from another ship. It was noted by the captain himself that Anne seemed awfully taken by one of the new young crewmen. He was young and a bit effeminate, and it turned out he was called Mary. And y'all, as I mentioned before, the pirates, between murdering, theft, rape, plundering, they were kind of like sea hippies. Yeah, sea hippies who liked to fight. They loved freedom, free love, free booze, and arr. So, a trio they became, Anne, Jack, and Mary. By September, Governor Rogers had put out a warrant and reward for the capture of Rackham and his crew. The reward announcement was published in papers even as far away as Boston, Massachusetts. On October 22nd, 1720, Anne and Calico Jack's ship came upon a sloop that had just so happened to be under the commission of the governor of Jamaica. Anne and her shipmates were also reported to be a bit sloshed when they overtook the sloop. A fight ensued, though it was a brief one. The pirate crew was transported back to Jamaica to stand trial. Rackham was tried and sentenced on November 16th. He was hanged 2 days later. Next, Anne and Mary were tried. A survivor of one of the attacks was a woman named Dorothy Thomas, and she would describe in detail Bonnie and Reed's appearance during their trial. They wore men's jackets and long trousers, and handkerchiefs tied about their heads, and each of them had a machete and a pistol in their hands, and they cursed and swore at the men to murder her, meaning Dorothy herself. Thomas was also recorded that she knew that the women were women because of the largeness of their breasts. So I guess that gave them away. And it was reported that every once in a while, Anne and Mary, if they got into some trouble while fighting, they would sometimes, rip a shirt open, show us your ghosts, that kind of thing. Mary and Anne were tried on November 28th, and the two tried to play up the helpless damsels in distress motif. And they claimed that they were forced into the life of sea hippies by those mean men, but the court wasn't hearing it. Both were condemned.
You, Mary Reed, and Anne Bonny, alias Bon, are to go from hence to the place whence you came, and from thence to the place of execution, where you shall be severally hung by the neck until you are severally dead, yes. And God of his infinite mercy be merciful to both your souls. Take them away.
When the damsel in distress roles didn't work, they went to the next act. They pulled the pregnancy card, also known as plating the belly. It's assumed then that the matrons of the court allowed a reprieve for the pair until they either gave birth or died. Well, Mary was buried April 28, 1721 in St. Catherine's Churchyard. Her stone simply read, Mary Reed, Pirate. A burial for the baby wasn't recorded, so it's not known if she was truly pregnant or not, or if maybe she died in childbirth or died due to miscarriage. We don't know. They didn't record that. And then, what happened to our Anne and her baby? Both of her lovers were dead, and the good times seemed to be over. And it's here that we kind of lose track of Anne Bonny. It's speculated that her father carried some sway in the colonies and was able to grease the right palms to secure his daughter's release. Some accounts say that she returned to Charleston, married and had a family, and died at the ripe old age of 84. She might have even lived long enough to see the birth of the United States. But a burial record for Spanish Town, Jamaica lists the internment for an Anne Bonny. First name spelled differently, but that's not uncommon. December 29th, 1733. And that time would have put her in her 30s, which is much closer to life expectancy back then, especially for an ex-pirate from Ireland who lived in a tropical climate. The deck was kind of stacked against Anne. Side notes. This is one of the times I wish I had a window through history. I'd really like to know what happened to Anne. Did she really pull a Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid scenario? She escaped the noose and went on to live as a Southern lady? Or was she freed and remained in Spanish Town? Did her baby live? Sometimes history just leaves us with even more questions. And y'all, what are we replacing oldest buildings by state with? Y'all help a host out. Email me, message me, post on the social media. Whatever ideas y'all have. because until one of us thinks of something, I'm just going to recommend my favorite TikTok accounts. And this week is for Granddaddy. He's not mine, and I hope it's okay for me to call him that. I did get permission from his grandkids to talk about him, and I'll post a link to the TikTok account. But y'all, Granddaddy is a national treasure. He was born to sharecroppers in 1931. He shares stories from his past. And y'all, Granddaddy don't hold back. I love that his family is documenting his stories and sharing them with us. Y'all look up BXCRZY Cat Lady or search for 1931 Granddaddy on TikTok. And I hope y'all will love Granddaddy as much as I do. Over on Patreon, y'all, we got a new supporter. I'm so excited. Their name is Terry. Don't know really anything else other than that, but Terry, welcome to the family. I overshare on Patreon, and if y'all like the little tidbits y'all hear of producer Mike and I discussing topics, or me telling producer Mike a topic that may not necessarily be from the South, and he joins me for those over on the Patreon. If y'all think y'all may like that, check it out. And thanks again, Terry. How could I have forgotten to give shout outs, y'all? Okay, so firstly, I forgot to say that it was our Patreons that chose today's topic. I came up with 2 ideas for our end of summer episode, and they voted on it, and Pirates won. Also, I need to give a big shout out to Lee Solway. He was one of the very first podcasters I ever listened to. He had a podcast called Bizarre Tales. Working class dude from Grimsby, UK, y'all. Totally came through for me. Really appreciate it, Lee. He asked me to plug his clothing line for him, and it is called Barbarian Breed, and you can find it at barbarianbreed.com. Lots of workout gear, that kind of stuff. So if we have any listeners in the UK, especially, y'all check out Lee. And like I said, I think he was even like the first Patreon I ever subscribed to. It was him and his coworker Andy Macca, I believe his name was. And they did a paranormal podcast. And Lee's kind of one of the ones that inspired me, along with like Derek Hayes, the Dollop, the Expanded Perspective guys. They will always be my hero, my fellow Texans. So, but anyways, big shout out to Lee. You're the first fellow podcaster I've had on the show, and I so appreciate it, buddy. And if you ever need a southern voice, I'm your girl. Follow us on social media for show updates, and I also post pics to go along with each episode. You can email the show at loreofthesouth@gmail.com. If you care to check out the Patreon, only $3 a month. Search for The Lore of the South on patreon.com. And with that, we'll talk to y'all later on the next Lore of the South.
Stay tuned for a preview of our latest Patreon episode. Everybody in Florida at one time thought that they were part Indian.
That was just a southern thing.
Yeah.
Like, it was more acceptable to be part Native American than part any other race.
Right.
Because they were the original Americans.
Okay.
So, but he was one of those guys. Very common. I mean, like, his daughter grew up thinking, like, she was, like, a Cherokee princess. It was one of those kids. But he was, like, really into, like, natural stuff, even, like, way back in the day. And that's probably because they grew up so poor. They were, like, super, super poor. No running water, no indoor plumbing. Of course, this is the early 1900s. A lot of people didn't have that anyway. So Dad would tell this story about him. Apparently, he came out of, like, the bedroom walking funny or something one day. Sam did.
Yeah.
And everybody was just kind of looking at him like, okay, well, we're not going to say anything because this joker's crazy anyway. And he may pull a gun on us because we questioned the way he was walking.
Right.
He finally just got this big grin on his face because he could tell everybody was like, what is happening with this man? What is happening? But nobody would ask him. So he was finally just looked at him and he's like, well, let's just say me and the turpentine had an appointment in the bathroom and those hemorrhoids won't be sticking their heads out of there again.
Oh, Jesus.
So yes, my step-grandfather applied turpentine to his hemorrhoids as a homeopathic home remedy.
So I'd be curious. So I'd be curious to know, like, did that work? Or was he, like, reapplying in a month? Or, like...
Dad loved it. That was one of his favorite Sam stories. Was the only statement he made about it was those hemorrhoids would not be poking their heads out of there again.
Ooh, oh my goodness. Like, he probably also wasn't sitting down for a good couple hours. If you loved what you heard, check out the Patreon page for exclusive content by searching for The Lore of the South on patreon.com.